The grand auction hall buzzed with murmurs and disinterest as the spotlight fell on a horse lying motionless in the center of the ring. The chestnut mare's coat was marred with scars, telling silent stories of hardship and neglect. The auctioneer's voice rang out, desperate to spark interest, but the crowd remained unmoved. Laughter rippled through the room as someone muttered about the horse not being worth a dime. Whispers grew louder, laced with ridicule. A woman in a designer dress remarked with disdain that the animal looked like it had given up on life. Others nodded, their judgments sharp and final. The horse's eyes seemed dull, its spirit crushed by years of suffering. In that grand glittering hall, it was clear that this animal didn't belong. It was a spectacle of rejection, and no one spared it a second thought. At the back of the room, partially hidden in shadow, sat Sarah, her hollow eyes fixed on the abandoned mare, her thin frame nearly as fragile as the horse's. Something about the animal's quiet resignation resonated deep within her. Sarah recognized that emptiness, that complete surrender to a world that had proven itself too cruel to bear. Her fingers traced the folded note in her pocket, her final goodbye. Tomorrow wouldn't come, not for her. She had made her decision weeks ago, planned every detail. This auction was merely a distraction, one last glimpse of life before walking away from it forever. Yet, as the crowd's mockery grew louder, something stirred in Sarah's chest. A flicker of emotion, the first she had felt in months. The mare lifted her head slightly, eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for someone, anyone who might see beyond her broken exterior. For a brief moment, those eyes locked with Sarah's and an electric current of recognition passed between them. Two broken souls, discarded by a world that valued perfection and productivity above all else. Two creatures who had given everything they had until nothing remained but hollow shells and scarred memories. The mare's gaze didn't plead or beg, it simply acknowledged Sarah's presence, one invisible being, recognizing another. The auctioneer's voice grew desperate, calling for any bid, any amount. The crowd shifted impatiently, ready to move on to more promising prospects. Without thinking, without planning, Sarah's hand rose slightly from her lap. The small gesture sent ripples through the room, heads turning in surprise to find the source of the unexpected bid. For the first time in months, Sarah felt visible. For the first time in years, someone had truly seen the mare. Neither knew it yet, but in that moment of connection, both of their fates had just changed forever. The days before Sarah Mills arrived at the auction house had been mechanical, empty motions of a woman already gone from this world in every way but physical. She had methodically closed her bank accounts, donated most of her belongings, and left her apartment keys with a brief note explaining she wouldn't return. The weight of her losses had hollowed her out completely. First the miscarriage, then Thomas walking away, followed by the company she'd built crumbling under financial pressure. The final blow came when her mother, her last remaining family, lost her battle with cancer 3 months ago. Sarah had calculated everything perfectly. The small cabin, deep in the mountains, was rented under a different name. The supplies she'd need for her final days were already packed in her car. She had chosen this remote auction as her last public appearance, a strange impulse she couldn't explain even to herself. Perhaps it was the childhood memories of visiting horse farms with her father, the only time she remembered feeling truly safe, or maybe it was just convenience. The auction house was on the route to the mountains, one last stop before disappearing forever. The morning had dawned gray and fitting, matching the emptiness inside her. Sarah dressed without seeing her reflection, her once vibrant frame now gaunt, her dark hair dull and listless. The auction catalog sat unopened on the passenger seat. She had no intention of bidding, no reason to participate. This was merely observation, a final glimpse of humanity before leaving it behind completely. Pulling into the gravel lot, Sarah noted how few cars were present. A forgotten auction for forgotten animals, fitting company for her final day. She slipped inside unnoticed, choosing a seat in the back row where shadows concealed her presence. The wooden bench creaked beneath her weight, but no one turned to look. She had perfected the art of invisibility these past months, moving through the world like a ghost already departed. Around her, people chatted and laughed, their voices seeming to come from some distant reality that no longer included her. Sarah's fingers absently traced the outline of the sealed envelope in her pocket. Inside was her final letter explaining why she'd chosen to vanish, though she doubted anyone would search long enough to find it. The authorities might look briefly, but there would be no desperate family members demanding answers, no close friends organizing search parties. She had successfully untethered herself from every meaningful connection, preparing for this final disappearance. The auctioneer tapped his microphone, calling the small crowd to attention. Sarah settled deeper into her seat, watching through hollow eyes as the first animals were led into the ring. She felt nothing, no anticipation, no emotion, just the quiet certainty that when she left this building, she would be leaving civilization for the last time. The laughter grew sharper as the auctioneer's pleas for bids echoed through the hall. The mayor's ears flattened against her head, a small gesture that spoke volumes about her awareness of the mockery directed at her. Someone from the front row made a crude joke about glue factories, triggering a fresh wave of chuckles that rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's voice held a note of desperation as he lowered the starting price again, then again trying to generate any interest in the broken animal. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. It wasn't sympathy, not exactly. It was recognition, raw and undeniable. The way the horse stood there, enduring the laughter, the dismissal, the cruel words. The animal didn't fight back or try to escape. She simply existed in her pain, accepting that this was all life had left to offer. Sarah knew that posture. She had practiced it in front of her own mirror for months now. From her shadowed corner, Sarah watched as a man in an expensive suit nudged his companion, whispering something that made them both snort with derision. The mayor's head dipped lower, as if the weight of their judgment was a physical burden pressing down on her scarred back. The auctioneer announced a final call, his voice tinged with embarrassment at the failed sale. Something stirred in Sarah's chest, a flicker of emotion so unexpected, it nearly took her breath away. Not compassion or pity. Those gentle emotions had burned away months ago. This was something fiercer, more primal: indignation, rage, a sudden, irrational desire to deny these laughing people their entertainment at the broken mare's expense. Before Sarah could process what was happening, her hand was in the air. The movement was slight, barely perceptible, but in the moment of silence that followed the auctioneer's final call, it caught his desperate eye. His gavel paused mid-descent, hovering in the air as he squinted toward the back of the room. The crowd turned, faces showing surprise that quickly morphed into curiosity when they spotted the thin, pale woman in the shadows. Sarah's throat tightened as dozens of eyes fixed on her. She had worked so hard to become invisible these past months, and now, on her final day, she had just made herself the center of attention. The auctioneer called out the bid amount, his voice reflecting disbelief that anyone would pay even that pittance for such a hopeless case. Sarah gave a small nod, confirming her intention. A hushed murmur spread through the crowd. The mayor's head lifted slightly, her ears swiveling toward the back of the room, as if searching for the source of the unexpected reprieve. For a brief electric moment, their eyes met again across the auction floor. There was no gratitude in the horse's gaze, no sudden transformation, just a quiet, profound recognition between two beings who had reached the same conclusion about life's value. And yet, against all logic, were still here. The gavel fell with a sharp crack, echoing through the now silent auction hall. Sarah sat frozen, her hand still slightly raised, as if the reality of what she'd just done hadn't fully registered. The auctioneer called out her bidder number, finalizing a sale she had never intended to make. The crowd's attention had shifted entirely to this strange, gaunt woman who had purchased the worthless mare that no one else wanted. Sarah rose from her seat, legs unsteady beneath her. Every step toward the auction office felt like walking through deep water, her movements slow and dreamlike. Behind her, whispers followed. Who was she? Why would anyone waste money on that broken-down animal? The judgment stung, but in a distant way, like feeling pain through Novocaine. At the payment counter, Sarah mechanically handed over her credit card. The transaction felt surreal. One last unexpected expense before her planned disappearance. The clerk eyed her skeptically, clearly wondering what this pale, hollow-eyed woman intended to do with a horse in such poor condition. Sarah signed the paperwork without reading it, her mind still struggling to catch up with her impulsive action. Outside, the auction staff had already loaded the mare into a holding pen. The animal stood with her head low, seemingly unaware that her fate had changed. Sarah approached cautiously, stopping at the metal barrier. Up close, the horse's condition was even worse. Ribs clearly visible beneath her dull coat, old scars crisscrossing her legs and flanks, eyes clouded with what looked like defeat. Sarah had to arrange transport. Her plans had never included a horse. Her small inherited property on the outskirts of town was meant only as a temporary stopping point, somewhere to sort through her mother's remaining belongings before continuing to the remote cabin where she would disappear. Now, standing before this unexpected purchase, Sarah felt the first disruption to her carefully constructed exit plan. The transport coordinator approached, clipboard in hand. His eyebrows raised slightly as he looked between Sarah and the mare, his expression making clear his assessment of both. Sarah provided her address in a voice that sounded distant to her own ear. More paperwork, more curious stares from the staff, who clearly wondered why this fragile-looking woman would take on such a hopeless case. As the loading began, the mare balked briefly at the trailer ramp, then surrendered with the same resignation she'd shown in the auction ring. Sarah watched from a distance, feeling oddly connected to this animal's quiet acquiescence. A heavy-set man loading nearby horses shook his head, commenting to his colleague about wasted money and misplaced sentimentality. Sarah didn't correct him. Let them think she was some misguided woman with a soft heart. It didn't matter what they believed. By this time tomorrow, according to her original plan, she would be gone anyway. This detour, this unexpected purchase, was merely a brief delay in her carefully planned disappearance. The transport trailer rumbled down the gravel driveway, its heavy tires crunching against loose stones as it approached the weathered farmhouse. Sarah stood on the porch, watching with distant eyes as the driver maneuvered the vehicle toward the small paddock adjacent to the property. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown yard, highlighting the neglect that had claimed the place since her mother's passing. The barn's red paint was peeling, the fence posts leaning at precarious angles, a fitting sanctuary for two broken things on their final day. The process of unloading the mare was mechanical, efficient. Sarah signed the final papers, accepted basic care instructions with a nod, and watched as the trailer pulled away, leaving her alone with the animal she had never planned to own. The mare stood motionless in the center of the paddock, her thin frame statue-like, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. Sarah approached the fence, studying the creature she had impulsively rescued from public ridicule. Echo. The name formed in Sarah's mind, without prompting. A remnant of something that once made sound, now merely returning emptiness. It seemed fitting for both of them. Hollow vessels, echoes of their former selves. Sarah filled a water trough and scattered hay across the ground, establishing the minimal care that her unexpected companion would need. Tomorrow she would call a local rescue to collect the horse. By then Sarah would be gone, her final arrangements complete. As dusk settled over the farm, Sarah returned to the porch, a cup of tea cooling beside her as she sorted through the remaining items in her mother's house. Echo hadn't moved much. hadn't explored her new surroundings with the curiosity a healthier animal might show. She simply existed, accepting whatever came without resistance or hope. Sarah understood that posture, that quiet resignation. It was the same energy she carried in her own bones. Night fell completely, and Sarah brought a small lantern to the paddock, placing fresh water within Echo's reach. The mare watched her with those empty eyes, not afraid, not interested, just observing. As Sarah turned to leave, Echo took 3 steps forward, following her movement. It wasn't a gesture of connection or gratitude, just the instinctive shifting of one empty vessel toward another. Inside the house, Sarah continued her preparations. The letters were sealed, the instructions for Echo's care written clearly for whoever would find them. Her final arrangements remained unchanged, except for this one small addition, ensuring the horse would be collected and cared for after she was gone. It wasn't kindness, Sarah told herself, just responsibility, a loose end to be tied before her departure. Yet as she peered through the window at the mare standing sentinel in the moonlight, Sarah felt the first unwelcome twist of hesitation in her chest. 2 broken spirits, abandoned by the world, now briefly connected by circumstance. It changed nothing, she reminded herself firmly. By this time tomorrow, only Echo would remain. The morning dawned cold and gray, matching Sarah's mood as she stood at the kitchen window, staring out at Echo in the paddock. 3 days had passed since the auction, 3 days longer than she had planned to remain. Something kept delaying her departure, small practical matters concerning the horse. She told herself it was merely responsibility, not attachment, that had extended her timeline. Sarah moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, her mind fixed on finalizing her plans. Echo watched from the paddock, her gaze following Sarah's movements through the windows. There was something different in the mare's posture today. Her head slightly higher, her ears forward, tracking Sarah's presence. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat on the porch steps. A small wooden box opened beside her. Inside lay her father's old service revolver, its metal cold against her fingertips. As she cleaned it meticulously, her original plan had changed, but the outcome would be the same. The remote cabin seemed unnecessary now. Why travel further when this isolated farmhouse offered the same privacy? Lost in dark thoughts, Sarah didn't notice Echo's approach until the mare stood directly before the porch, her shadow falling across the wooden steps. The horse stood unnaturally still, positioned between Sarah and the driveway, as if blocking an exit. Their eyes met, and something in Echo's gaze made Sarah's hands tremble. She closed the box quickly, inexplicably ashamed. The next morning, Sarah found herself drawn to the paddock. Echo approached cautiously, accepting the apple slices Sarah offered on a flat palm. The mare's lips were surprisingly gentle, her breath warm against Sarah's skin. It was the first physical contact Sarah had experienced in months, and something in her chest tightened painfully. That evening, as Sarah stood at the edge of the property, staring into the gathering darkness with the weight of her decision pressing down, hoofbeats approached from behind. Echo appeared at her side, silent and watchful. The mare didn't nudge or seek attention. She simply positioned herself beside Sarah, a quiet sentinel against the night. When Sarah finally turned back toward the house, Echo walked with her, matching her pace step for step. On the 7th day, Sarah found herself in the barn, rope in hand, tears streaming down her face as the weight of everything crashed through her carefully constructed walls. She leaned against a support beam, sliding to the ground as sobs racked her body. The sound of hooves on straw made her look up. Echo stood in the doorway, ears forward, watching intently. The mare approached slowly, lowering her head to Sarah's level. She didn't move closer, didn't offer false comfort, but stood guard, her body positioned between Sarah and the rope that had fallen from her grasp. As darkness fell, woman and horse remained in the barn, separated by mere inches, connected by something beyond words. 2 broken beings, somehow sensing each other's pain, creating in their shared brokenness something that neither had expected to find again, a reason to see tomorrow's sunrise. The morning air was crisp with autumn's first bite, as Sarah methodically packed the trunk of her car. 2 weeks had passed since the auction, 14 days longer than she had intended to stay. The letter was on the kitchen table. The arrangements for Echo's care detailed clearly a rescue organization would arrive tomorrow, but Sarah would be long gone by then. She had delayed too long already, allowing herself to be distracted by the daily routine of caring for the injured mare. Today was the day she would finally follow through. Sarah closed the trunk, her breath fogging in the cold air. She had left food and water sufficient for several days, though the rescue would arrive much sooner. There was nothing left to do but leave. As she approached the driver's door, a commotion from the paddock made her turn. Echo was pacing frantically along the fence line, her movements agitated in a way Sarah had never seen before. The mare's eyes were fixed on Sarah, tracking her every movement. Sarah hesitated, key in hand. Echo reared suddenly, front hooves pawing at the air before crashing back to earth. The mare charged the fence, stopping just short of crashing into it. Sarah froze, watching as Echo tossed her head, nostrils flaring. This wasn't the broken, resigned animal from the auction ring. This was something else entirely. Desperation, determination. With a sigh, Sarah pocketed her keys and walked to the paddock. Perhaps one final check would ease her conscience. The moment she approached, Echo calmed, her breathing still rapid, but her movements less frantic. Sarah inspected the water, the hay, finding everything in order. As she turned to leave, Echo positioned herself directly in Sarah's path, blocking her exit. Sarah stepped to the right. Echo mirrored her movement. She moved left. The mare shifted again, maintaining the barrier between Sarah and the gate. A cold weight settled in Sarah's stomach. This was more than coincidence. Somehow, this animal knew. After several failed attempts to leave the paddock, Sarah retreated to the house to regroup. Through the window, she watched Echo return to normal, grazing calmly now that Sarah was no longer heading toward the car. The mare's eyes flicked toward the house occasionally, maintaining an impossible vigilance. Hours later, as afternoon shadows lengthened, Sarah tried again. She slipped out the back door, circling wide around the paddock, to reach her car unseen. She had barely touched the car door when the sound of splintering wood split the air. Echo had broken through the paddock fence, charging across the yard toward her, movements deliberate but not threatening. The mare stopped a few feet away, sides heaving, a shallow cut visible where the wood had caught her shoulder. She stood firm, positioned directly between Sarah and the driver's door, her eyes locked on Sarah's face with an intelligence that seemed impossible, supernatural. Sarah's legs gave way as she sank to the gravel driveway, overcome by the realization that she couldn't leave. Not today. This broken creature had somehow sensed her darkest intentions and refused to allow them. Through her tears, Sarah saw Echo approach slowly, lowering her scarred head to Sarah's level, breath warm against her wet cheeks. Tomorrow, Sarah thought. Perhaps tomorrow. The broken fence remained unrepaired as autumn deepened around the small farmhouse. Sarah had canceled the rescue organization's visit, unable to explain, even to herself, why she had chosen to keep Echo. The mare's mysterious behavior had created a pause in Sarah's plans, a space in which questions began to form. What had happened to this animal before the auction? Why had she responded so intensely to Sarah's despair? One crisp morning, while cleaning Echo's scarred legs, Sarah noticed something beneath the dirt and matted hair. A small, faded symbol tattooed inside her right ear, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. The mark resembled a compass rose, with a small flame at its center. Curious, Sarah photographed it with her phone. At the local library, the elderly librarian recognized the symbol immediately. Her eyes widened as she showed Sarah a newspaper clipping from 7 years earlier. There in faded print was Echo, younger, healthier, magnificent. standing beside smiling children at a renowned therapy center for trauma survivors. The article described a remarkable horse named Ember, known for her uncanny ability to sense emotional distress in humans, particularly those contemplating suicide. Sarah's hands trembled as she read how Ember had prevented multiple suicides, somehow identifying individuals in crisis and refusing to leave their sides during their darkest moments. The horse had become something of a local legend until the center closed after losing funding. Ember had been sold to a private owner and then disappeared from public record. Further research revealed the rest of the story. Ember's new owner, expecting a champion show horse, couldn't understand her tendency to abandon training to stand near certain people. Frustrated by what he saw as disobedience, the man had resorted to increasingly severe discipline. When that failed to break her of her bad habits, he had eventually sold her, but not before inflicting the scars that now marked her body. Through several more sales, the once celebrated therapy horse had been reduced to the broken animal Sarah had found at auction. Her special gifts mistaken for stubbornness, her compassion interpreted as defiance. Yet despite everything, Echo Ember had retained her extraordinary sensitivity, recognizing in Sarah the same despair she had been trained to detect in others. Sarah sat in the paddock that evening. The newspaper articles spread around her as Echo grazed nearby. The mare occasionally lifted her head, checking Sarah's position as she had done consistently since that day by the car. The realization settled deep in Sarah's chest. This wasn't coincidence or imagination. Echo had recognized something in her that Sarah had tried to hide from the world, and had responded exactly as she had been trained to do years ago. Two beings, both misunderstood and mistreated, both carrying scars visible and invisible. Sarah reached out her hand, and Echo approached, lowering her head to meet Sarah's touch. For the first time, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility shifting into something else, a connection between two damaged souls who somehow, against all odds, had found each other at the precise moment when both needed saving. The winter snow had melted, giving way to the first tentative green shoots of spring around the farmhouse. Sarah stood on the porch, watching Echo, or Ember, as she now called her, trot across the paddock with a strength that seemed impossible compared to the broken creature from the auction. The mare's coat gleamed in the sunlight, the visible scars now badges of survival rather than marks of defeat. Sarah's own transformation had been equally profound, though less visible to the casual observer. The letter of goodbye remained in her desk drawer, never delivered, never completed. The final plans had been abandoned, one day at a time. Each sunrise bringing another reason to stay, another fence to repair, another grooming session, another moment of connection with the extraordinary animal who had somehow recognized the darkness in her soul. Sarah had begun volunteering at a local crisis center, sharing her story cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. The director had been fascinated by Ember's history, suggesting a partnership that seemed impossible 6 months ago. Now, twice weekly, Sarah brought carefully selected visitors to the farm, where Ember would unfailingly approach those who needed her most, standing sentinel beside them as invisible wounds began their slow healing. Local therapists had started referring their most challenging cases, people who, like Sarah, had decided life held nothing more for them. Ember's presence offered something professional intervention often couldn't: silent understanding without judgment, patience without expectation, connection without words. The small farm was changing too. New fencing gleamed white against the green fields. The barn roof had been repaired, its fresh red paint a declaration of renewal. Inside, stalls were being prepared for 2 more rescue horses, carefully selected for their unusual sensitivity to human emotion. Sarah's phone rang frequently. Now, calls from researchers studying animal-assisted therapy, from families desperate for help with loved ones lost in darkness, from news outlets interested in the remarkable story of a horse who saved a woman on the edge of oblivion. The attention still made Sarah uncomfortable, but she accepted it as necessary for the work they were doing. In the paddock, Ember lifted her head, ears pricking forward as she sensed Sarah watching. The mare trotted to the fence, her movements fluid and confident. Sarah approached, resting her hand on the warm neck, where scars still told their story of suffering and survival. Two broken souls had somehow found each other at the precise moment when both needed saving most. Their scars remained, visible reminders of pain endured, but they no longer defined either of them. The future stretched before them, uncertain but filled with purpose neither had imagined possible. Through their inexplicable connection, both had found something they had lost: the capacity to heal, to help, and most importantly, to hope. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of two wounded souls finding healing through their remarkable connection. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of hope and redemption. I'll hope to see you in the next video.